May 1945. The Third Reich is already dying. Berlin lies in ruins. Adolf Hitler is dead. The fronts are collapsing. But in the Austrian Alps, amidst thick fog and dark spruce forests, gunfire still echoes. And in an old stone castle, a battle is about to unfold. A battle that should never have happened. German soldiers, American tank crews, French politicians, even an SS officer, all standing shoulder to shoulder and firing at other Germans. This is not a legend. It happened on the morning of May 5th, 1945, in a small Austrian castle known as Schloss Itter. Later, historians would call this clash the strangest battle of World War II. But at that moment, none of its participants thought about strangeness. They thought of only one thing: survival. And one question remained: who would reach the castle first? American reinforcements or the SS? Welcome to Echoes of Valor X. Today we uncover one of the most incredible stories of the war's final days. A story where enemies become allies. A story of Wehrmacht Major Joseph Gangl and American officer John C. Lee Jr. A story of a castle where French prime ministers, generals, and even a famous tennis player, Jean Barotra, were locked behind stone walls. But to understand how it all happened, we need to go back a few days, when the war was already dying and chaos was just beginning.
Sometimes the end of a war doesn't feel like victory. It feels like fatigue, like mud under your boots. The smell of a wet uniform you haven't changed for days. I was a soldier in the Wehrmacht. By that point, just another man with a rifle, trying to understand what was happening. We were stationed in the Austrian town of Würgl, a small town, quiet, surrounded by mountains. In normal times, it smelled of bread and apple trees, but in the spring of 45, it smelled of smoke and fear.
By early May 1945, Germany had effectively lost the war. The Soviet army had taken Berlin. The Allies had broken through the Rhine. In the south, German units were retreating into the Alps. Soldiers deserted. Officers lost control. But not all. Some were still dangerous, especially the SS.
The SS still believed, or pretended to. They shot deserters, hung men from lampposts. Anyone displaying a white flag considered a traitor. But our commander was different, Major Joseph Gangl. He didn't give loud speeches. He simply said one day, "This war is over. Now our task is to protect the people." And from that moment, we stopped being an ordinary unit.
By early May, Major Gangl was already collaborating with the Austrian resistance. He refused to retreat. Instead, his men protected the citizens of Würgl from marauders and SS units. But a few kilometers from the town, a castle stood, old, dark, on a stone hill. And inside, people were held for whom the Nazi regime would have killed to the very end. The castle was called Schloss Itter, a small fortress in North Tyrol, medieval walls, stone towers, a narrow mountain road leading up. In ordinary times, it looked like something out of a fairy tale. But in 1943, everything changed. By order of Heinrich Himmler, the castle was turned into a prison. Not an ordinary one, a prison for very important prisoners.
We had heard rumors. They said it held French politicians, former prime ministers, generals, men who once commanded armies. Now they lived in the rooms of the old castle, under SS guard.
Among the prisoners were former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, his political rival Édouard Daladier, French generals, and even the sister of Charles de Gaulle. But the most unusual prisoner was a man who had never performed on a battlefield, but on a tennis court.
His name was Jean Barotra, champion, tennis star. The French called him the Flying Basque, because he moved across the court like a spring. No one knew then that in a few days he would have to jump over the castle wall, under fire from the SS.
On May 3, 1945, one of the prisoners decided to take a risk, a Yugoslav partisan named Zvonimir Chuchkovic. He worked at the castle as a handyman, and one morning he simply stepped out the gate, under the pretext of an errand. but he had no intention of returning.
He walked through the mountains for hours, through forests, over broken roads, and eventually he encountered the Americans.
An advanced detachment of the 103rd U.S. Infantry Division. The Americans were approaching the Alps. When they heard the story of a castle full of French VIP prisoners, they decided to send a rescue column. But fate had other plans.
The column was stopped by artillery fire. Orders from above. The boundary between divisional zones. Sometimes war breaks on bureaucracy. And the castle was left alone.
Meanwhile, the SS guards began to vanish. The castle commander fled. The SS soldiers abandoned their posts, and for the first time in 2 years, the prisoners gained access to weapons.
The French politicians opened the weapons storage. Imagine the scene. Former prime ministers, grey-haired generals, all with rifles, and no one knew what to do next. Because outside, the forest, and in the forest, the SS.
Then, one man mounted a bicycle, the castle's cook, a Czech named Andreas Krobot. He rode off to find help. And it was this ride that would change everything. Sometimes, the fate of an entire battle is decided not by a general, not by a tank, not by a division. Sometimes it all begins with a man on a bicycle. On the day of May 4th, 1945, a thin man in a kitchen apron rode out of the gates of Schloss Itter. His name was Andreas Krobot. He was just a cook, but he carried a note through the mountains, a note asking for help.
When I first heard this story, I couldn't believe it. A cook, on a bicycle, riding through the mountains to find an army. But by then, everything was already strange. The war was splintering at the seams. No one knew who reported to whom anymore.
Krobot descended the mountain road and headed for the town of Wurgel. The town lay just 8 kilometers from the castle, but the route was dangerous. Dispersed SS units hid in the forests. They shot anyone they considered a traitor.
We already knew what they did. They fired on windows with white flags. Sometimes they simply dragged men into the street, and no one ever saw them again. The SS had no intention of surrendering.
When Krobot reached Wurgel, he found a town that no longer belonged to any state. The Wehrmacht had gone. The Allies had not yet arrived, and SS soldiers roamed the streets. But there was also resistance, Austrian underground fighters, and one man who had become the town's protector.
Our commander, Major Joseph Gangel. He could have left with the others, but he stayed. Said he wouldn't allow the SS to commit a massacre here.
Krobot delivered the note to him. It contained just a few lines. French prisoners in the castle. SS guards gone. Nazis gathering in the woods. The castle is under threat. They need help.
I remember the Major reading that note. He was silent for a long time, then quietly said, "We won't make it, because we were too few. Against the SS, we wouldn't hold for long." But then he added, "We need to find the Americans."
American forces were already moving through Tyrol. Recon units of the 12th U.S. Armored Division entered the Austrian town of Kufstein. There, an officer waited who would play a decisive role. Lieutenant John C. Lee, Jr., commander of a Sherman tank.
I saw Major Gangel get into his old car, a white flag on the hood. It was a strange moment. A German officer was driving to surrender, to ask for help from the Americans.
When Gangel's car approached the American positions, the soldiers already had him in their sights. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then one American shouted, "Stop! Hands up!" Gangel raised his hands and approached them.
Later I heard what he said. He told the American officer, "There are French politicians in the castle. The SS are coming. If we do nothing, they will be killed."
Lieutenant John C. Lee, Jr. could have ignored him. It wasn't his mission, not his sector, not his responsibility. But sometimes decisions are made not by orders, but by conscience.
He didn't hesitate. He simply said, "We're going."
And so began one of the strangest military alliances of the entire war. German Wehrmacht soldiers, American tank crews, and one goal: to protect the French prisoners. A small column set out for the castle. An American Sherman tank, a few trucks, about 14 American soldiers, and a group of German artillerymen.
Riding with the Americans was strange. Very strange. Just a week ago, we were shooting at each other. Now we sat side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing a single cigarette.
The column moved along narrow mountain roads, but soon a problem arose. A bridge, an old wooden bridge over a river. It couldn't bear the weight of all the tanks.
One tank had to be left behind to guard the bridge, and then we moved on. Just one Sherman and a few soldiers.
The closer they got to the castle, the more dangerous the road became. The SS were already moving through these mountains, and soon that became clear.
We spotted them first. A few figures by the road. They were building a barricade.
A detachment of the SS, preparing a roadblock. But they hadn't expected to see a tank.
The Sherman appeared around the corner. The machine gun opened fire. It happened fast. Very fast. A few minutes, and the road was clear again.
After that, the column continued. Only a few kilometers remained to the castle, but no one knew how many SS soldiers were already moving toward it. When the column finally climbed the winding road, they saw it: an old stone castle, towers, high walls, narrow windows like loopholes.
It looked like something from another era, as if we had returned to the Middle Ages. Only instead of knights at the gates, there was an American tank.
When the gates opened, prisoners came out to meet the soldiers. French politicians, generals, men who once ran a country.
They looked at us, strangely, because they had expected an entire army, but they saw one tank.
Among them was former French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud and his old political rival Edouard Daladier, and the famous tennis player Jean Barotra.
One of the French asked, "Is that all?" The American officer shrugged and said, "For now, yes."
But they had no time to debate, because the enemy was already gathering in the woods. Soldiers of the 17th SS Division, 100 to 150 men. They were coming for the castle, to retake the prisoners and to kill anyone inside.
And then we realized. We would defend the castle. Americans, Germans, French politicians, all together, against the SS.
The Sherman tank took position at the gate. Soldiers took up positions along the walls. Windows became firing points. Rifles loaded inside the castle, machine guns mounted at loopholes.
Night fell on the mountains, and shadows began to move in the forest. This is where the real battle begins.
Early in the morning, a small SS reconnaissance group approached the castle. They opened fire on the bastions, testing our strength.
Bullets ripped through the air. Stones fell on our heads. The French, armed only with pistols, trembled but stood beside me. I heard someone whisper, "If we die, at least not alone." Their courage burned like a torch in the dark night.
A sniper and an 88mm SS gun unleashed fury on the castle. The Sherman, named Besotten Jenny, was destroyed. The radio men miraculously survived.
The tank exploded. The ground shook. I dove behind a wall, trying to find cover. Dust and smoke blinded my eyes. French faces in panic. And I kept thinking, how strange. Here we are, with Americans and former enemies, defending those we once held prisoner.
Major Josef Gangl, leader of the German defenders, died trying to move former Prime Minister Paul Reynaud out of the line of fire.
I saw him fall. His body collapsed on the stones. God, no. I couldn't scream. We lost him. But his courage, It held us all together.
French tennis player Jean Barotra, unarmed, volunteered to vault over the castle wall, bypassing SS positions to guide reinforcements.
I couldn't believe my eyes. A man in sports clothes, running through fire and death to save us. His steps thundered in my heart, reminding me that even in war, moments of pure bravery exist.
At 4 p.m., reinforcements from the 142nd Regiment, 36th Division arrived. The battle ended in an Allied victory. The SS were crushed, about 100 captured.
We stood among the ruins, exhausted. Stones, blood, smoke. I felt a strange relief, and at the same time, emptiness. Gangdal was gone. We saved the castle. But at what cost?
This was one of only 2 known battles where Germans and Americans fought side by side, and the only instance where an active Waffen SS officer fought on the Allied side.
I will never forget this day. Enemies yesterday, allies today. The world is crumbling, but sometimes, among the ruins, honor is born.
The Battle of Schloss Itter went down in history as the strangest battle of World War II, the only known instance where an active Waffen SS officer fought on the side of the Allies. 5 days after Hitler's suicide, just 2 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, this episode showed that even in a world of chaos, humanity is still possible. If you want to hear more forgotten stories, subscribe to Echoes of Valor X.